Wilson by Daniel Clowes. I gotta Google how to pronounce his name, but Clowes, I'm assuming it is. But anyway, Wilson by Daniel Clowes is one of the funniest books I've ever read, but it's certainly not the type of humour that's going to be for everyone, because it's quite dark in places, the humour. But it's a wonderful story, I think. First and foremost, the story itself follows the main character, Wilson, and it starts off by telling the story in a very interesting way, and it keeps that consistently throughout the rest of the book. And how it presents the story is in one-page bursts. So basically you get a story of him walking the dog, for example, and engaging with a member of the public, and then the next page is him elsewhere doing something else. So every page is kind of a quick self-contained story, really. Sometimes they rely on the story that come before it and come directly after, but more often than not, they are quite condensed and quite quick, easy, funny or interesting one-page comics. But then you put the whole thing together and you get this whole story arc of Wilson, who is this older guy who's basically just jaded to the world, couldn't give two shits about the world at all, really. Wants everything for himself, wants people to treat him one way, but he treats them in totally other way. Sociopath, just such a contradiction on every single level. And then the story kind of charts Wilson getting back in touch with his ex-girlfriend or ex-wife, I forget which it is now, and finding out that she was pregnant and she had a daughter, and him trying to kind of forge a relationship with this woman, with his new daughter, but equally doing a terrible job of it, doing a vastly terrible job of it. The artwork as well does shift page on page, so you definitely get a kind of variety of different art styles. As you go into it, or as you fall into it, there's about 6 or 7 kind of definitively different styles of art, and every page kind of changes the style of art going forward, and there's a title for the story at the top of each page. But the artwork throughout is stunning, even when you get that really simplistic, kind of over-the-top caricature, kind of almost kind of Snoopy-like drawing is stunning. But then when you get that typical Daniel Clowes artwork, that is crisp and clean as ever. And the one thing that really impresses me about this story is how it's unafraid to make inappropriate jokes and be funny and be comfortable in funniness as well, but then equally just take the story and put it in a total different direction, and without spoiling anything really. It's only a shortish story, it's only about 90 or so pages if memory serves. Well, actually about 80 or so pages looking at it now. It generally kind of is going in one direction, and then all of a sudden the character will say just one line or one thing, and you think, oh, this relationship is not what I thought it was at all. There's another dynamic, something going on. Because that one story page burst doesn't necessarily keep a consistent timeline. So sometimes you were looking at Wilson, in 1 week, like I say, walking the dog or something, and then the next story could be several weeks after, or a few hours after, or directly after. There's no consistency between the time frame, and so it allows tons of stuff to happen in between those one pages. And it'll only reveal itself when the characters kind of acknowledge it, really. And so, for example, a character is in it, and then all of a sudden this character turns around and says something, and then all of a sudden you realise, oh, that character actually doesn't want to be here. They're here against their will in some way. So something's happened off screen, if you want to put it like that I haven't seen, but now this changes the dynamic totally. What's Wilson doing? What's going on? This has changed that story, that narrative, and it does that often. It kind of plays with what's happening off screen, what it's telling you, and changing the story massively. There is not many examples that have the strength of character development going on here, because again, finding out about Wilson in one-page bursts, finding out about him hating the world, about him loving, about him being helpful to others and charitable, but then how he sabotaging people and sending his family dog shit in the post and things like that. It is character development on an amazing scale, to be fair. But the other thing as well is the amount of art on showcase here, the amount of innovation, because again, he could have wrote this in a kind of clean narrative, but he decided to do it in this one-page story burst going through the whole thing. And when you start it off, you perhaps kind of think, what's going on here? It's a bit jarring because you're not familiar really, unless you read like web comics and other things like that. You're not really familiar with these one-page comic bursts almost. Very similar to, you know, comics in Sunday newspapers and things like that back in the day, where you get little snippets of the story each week, but then when the story comes back next week, it could be something totally different. And yeah, and the opening few pages really kind of give you an indication of his personality, so taking you through kind of his day-to-day life before he then goes on this life-changing journey to find this wayward daughter and wayward ex-wife and all that. So for example, well actually the 2 pages, Cute Dog and Table Sharing, and some of those early stories, they really give you an indication that there's a lot of resentment, a lot of contradiction in terms, a lot of things going on in Wilson, which doesn't make him a straightforward character, that makes him quite unlikable but quite funny and intriguing at the same time. And so for example, Cute Dog is him walking down the street, everybody passing by is saying, what a cute dog, what a cute dog, and then a guy walks past, he doesn't say anything, and Wilson stops and is like, asshole. Do you know, it hates him. And then in the following story, he then goes to sit down in a coffee shop with the person he doesn't know, starts a conversation, but that person doesn't want to engage. That person's on the laptop working and doesn't want to engage. And so Wilson starts shouting at him. So on both of those pages, it kind of shows you that he wants interaction from people out and about, but it has to be kind of on his terms. It has to be the way he expects and wants it. People have to say and interact with him in a way he wants. And it creates some situations that are just funny more than anything. And like I say, Wilson is this quick, fast-paced book that doesn't dwell on the story too much, and again, it introduces stuff that really takes a curveball on the whole story massively, but generally it's a quick, fun, funny story that never quite goes the way you think it's going to go at all. But in general, this story is a fantastic introduction, I think, to Daniel Clowes and his work. I would say the kind of, you know, books like this and Ghost World and other things like that are great introductions into how Daniel Clowes crafts comics and how he crafts these very eccentric, unlikable but interesting, engaging characters, and puts them into situations that on the surface seem quite straightforward and normal, but there's a lot of levels and a lot of layers going on. And yeah, this is probably my favourite of his work, just because Wilson I find so funny, because he's such a knob and he's so unlikable, but then I can't stop reading about him and can't stop laughing at him. And as the back says, a big-hearted slob, a devoted father, a husband, an idiot, a sociopath, a delusional blowhard, a delicate flower, 100% Wilson-esque. And yeah, he is all of that and a lot more. This version of the book is published by Jonathan Cape. You can get this online secondhand for really cheap. I think I paid about £2 or £3 for my copy beer, to be fair. And yeah, you don't have to spend loads to get a really interesting comic and a well-made comic. It's a hardback, slightly different size-wise to your normal standard trade paperback. It's a bit bigger and a little bit wider than most comics you'll pick up. The paper inside is all quite matte finish paper, but the colour palette changes per strip as the art style does as well. And yeah, it is a really well-made book, sewn binding, and for my money, a really interesting, funny and engaging book. But anyway, that's enough said about Wilson. Have a look at it yourself and hopefully you'll enjoy it and find it as funny as I did. But thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.